We did have some minor revisions, just really small stuff there, just cleaning up a car and a couple of little things. I know you have 6:30, so just a couple.
Okay.
Minor
Good morning and welcome. My name is Steve Robichaud, Planning Board Chair. This morning is a meeting of the Town of Barnstable Planning Board Regulatory Agreement Subcommittee. This meeting is being held at Barnstable Town Hall, 367 Main Street, Hyannis, Mass., in the James H. Crocker Jr. Hearing Room at 8:30 a.m. And I'd like to start by introducing our subcommittee members, starting with Steve.
Hey, good morning, Stephen Costello.
And Jen.
Hi, thank you.
Paula Schnipp.
And Hilda.
Hilda here, Housing Committee for Barnstable. Thank you.
That one. Okay.
See Hilda?
Oh, do you want me to repeat that?
Great, thank you. And notice of recording. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on Channel 18 in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20. And I now must inquire whether anyone else is taping this meeting, and if so, please make your presence known. Thank you. Application materials may be accessed by contacting karen.herond@town.barnstable.ma.us or calling 508-862-4064. And this morning, we're going to be discussing a regulatory agreement for Dockside Condominiums. Shoestring Properties LLC seeks to enter into a regulatory agreement with the town of Barnstable to construct 34 condominium units in 2 buildings with associated improvements at 110 School Street and 115 School Street in Hyannis. The applicant seeks waivers from dimensional bulk requirements, including building height and stories, setbacks, and lot coverage standards, as well as waivers associated with density, parking design standards and dimensions, lighting, and landscape improvements. And just a couple notes, this is not a public hearing. And I'd like to start this morning by reviewing the intent and the process for this subcommittee. And for that, we're going to start with Jim Kupfer. Thank you, Jim.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending on this early Monday morning. So I thought it would be good to really step back and understand why we're here this morning and the establishment of the subcommittee itself. So under our regulatory agreement ordinance, which is 168, under regulatory agreements, the planning board is our lead negotiator for the town of Barnstable in formulating this exactly what it is, an agreement between 2 parties. And through the negotiation process, under 168.5, the planning board can seek assistance from applicable boards, departments, and other representatives to help with the negotiation. And speaking with the planning board and with the chairman of the planning board, it was thought that a subcommittee would be a good next step in order to pursue further negotiations. In discussing again with the board, it was thought, given that from the planning board recommendation, it goes to town council, it was only wise to bring on representation from town council, and thank you, Ms. Schnepp and Ms. Cullum, for attending. And also, given this is a very important housing concern, it was excellent, and I really appreciate Ms. Hayes volunteering to represent the Housing Committee this morning with the subcommittee. So I think it's a really good mix of representation in order to fully get an understanding of the regulatory agreement and next steps. From this negotiation process, the intent really here for this subcommittee is to fully digest the project itself, fully digest the draft regulatory agreement that you have before you in your package, and is also found online, and provide some recommendations and findings for the planning board. So this deliverable here for this subcommittee is to review in detail the project that the applicant is proposing, in detail the agreement that is before the town, and then again provide findings and, if appropriate, a recommendation back to the planning board as the lead negotiator. From there, the planning board will take in those findings and potential recommendation and consider those for their own recommendation. And again, as the process lays out, that recommendation then goes to town council for their review. And I think this might improve the process so that with representation from council and board at town council, if it gets to that point, then there will be a good dialogue already started with this agreement proposal. So if I may, real quick too, for those, we are live and for the public to view, did want to go over how to get these documents, because there's a lot going on in town, and I think one important thing is to make sure everyone is aware that everything that this subcommittee is looking at is available online. So if you go to the town's website at townofbarnstable.us, and you go to our planning board's website, so under boards and committees, you go to planning board, and right there on the top, we have the new planning board meeting materials, and you click on the here, you can go to, it opens up to all the different documents that the planning board's looking at. And again, this is a subcommittee of the planning board, that's why it's housed with the planning board. And we have a lot of, planning board is very busy, but one specific thing is regulatory agreements. And in there, you see the different regulatory agreements that they're looking at, and this one here is dockside. And all the materials that the planning board's looking at is right there. Everything's logged right online there. If you have any troubles, accessing that, Karen Herron from our planning office is always readily available. And within that too is the subcommittee regulatory agreement folder, which is specific to today, but again, zooming out, this is the regulatory agreement for dockside, so all the documents there are for public consumption and obviously for this committee's consumption. So I thought, Mr. Chairman, if it's appropriate, I know I want to be respectful of time, so again, in terms of process, the thought would be this morning to have the applicant give a overall presentation of the project itself for the board to consider the project and the attributes that it's proposing. We do have a number of department heads here that are available to speak to the matter. So this process has already gone through the site plan review process, so kind of the technical review process with our DPW, our building, our fire, our conservation. So we do have a number of department heads here and available to answer any questions you may have in those regards. And then from there, if time allows, certainly can look at the regulatory draft agreement, because this is specifically, the agreement that the town's going to enter into if it got that far. And so looking into the ins and outs of that regulatory agreement. But I think it would be appropriate this morning to start with overview presentation by the applicant, as this may be first time for many of us. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. And process sounds great to me. I think that's the best way to move forward. Obviously, Steve and I have heard the presentation, but I'd like for us to go through it again in detail. And I think that's a great place to start from there. I do think it would be appropriate to take initial board questions and comments, and then from there, talk about potentially talking to some of the town department heads, because I'm sure some questions will come up for that. I do also want to note that public comment will be available to be made at the full planning board meeting, as well as town council when that time comes. So without further ado, why don't we have the applicant do a full presentation? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee meeting. For the record, my name is John Kenny. I'm an attorney with a law office in Centerville. And I come before you this morning representing Mr. Bornstein, Shoestring Properties, and we're looking to develop the site at 110 School Street and 115 School Street in Hyannis. Many of you are familiar with the site. If you're not, it's where the Dockside Restaurant is on the coming down School Street on the left, and the empty parking lot on the right. Dan, it might be easiest just to walk right through the site plan to orient everybody, and then we can kind of get into the details and the community benefits. And I don't know if you want to go through all the waivers, or if you want to discuss as part of the presentation, or if you want to discuss those in a give and take back and forth, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, I know everyone on the board has had a chance to review that list of waivers, so no need to read it in full, but I think the good focus would be for the site plan review and reviewing the actual plans.
Sure. So with that, my name is Dan Ojala. I'm a land surveyor and also a civil engineer. Run down Cape Engineering in Yarmouthport and helping Mr. Bornstein and his son Aaron out with permitting on the project. Their corporation, the LLC, is Shoestring Properties. I would just point out as a frame of reference, some of you may remember many years ago, the Dockside Restaurant was down on the waterfront. And when Mr. Bornstein first bought the property, the Steamship Authority was redeveloping next door. They moved the dockside up to the top. You can see on the highest section there, and Jim pulled up on the screen there this older photograph. In its heyday, you can read here, Lewis Bay Motel, Restaurant, and Marina, so it was quite an operation. There was a big swimming pool out front. Overlooking the waterfront. You could come in, get a dock, go up and sleep there. And on the western parcel, which is 115, I believe, School Street, there was a double stack motel. So this isn't exactly a virgin forest we're cutting down here. It's a redeveloped site. It was heavily developed in the past, parking front to back. The old retaining wall in the back of that was the old wall of the motel on that west parcel. And the east parcel was heavily developed with a big motel. Stuart had hired us back in '96 to redevelop the restaurant. So on the east parcel, there is paved parking in the restaurant. It's connected to town sewer, which is a very good thing when you've got waterfront property. That's a well-established area with good utility infrastructure. We are working with Hans over at the Water Department to upgrade the water line through the site and make a loop connection. We've worked with engineering to provide additional drainage for the roadway. They did add some drainage down to the south of the property. Since we started the redevelopment work, which is nice, but we'll pick up a little bit extra and infiltrate that into dedicated easements on site, both on the north and the south side of our property. The main layout and the thought on this project, Mr. Bornstein feels that he's got a very valuable waterfront property, so to make it more efficient, what he's decided to do is instead of having a big open parking field, which is, not so sightly and takes up a lot of space, what he would do is put that parking underground. So what we've done on the south end of the site there, you can see some ramps in with the arrows. That's where you'll go down underneath, about 4 feet down below grade. So it's roughly 4 down, 4 up on each side, but you'll have basically underground parking under each of the buildings. And what that lets him do is get almost all the parking out of sight, underground, and be a little bit more efficient. So he's able to get the density that we're requesting on the property and meet zoning code for the parking requirements as wavered. The basic layout is a building on 110 on the east. It looks like 2 buildings, but it's connected by the large underground parking structure, so it's technically 1 building under the building code. It'll be fully sprinklered, it'll be serviced by elevators, and there'll be some at-grade parking serving guests and occasional tenants of the condominiums. You can see 3 on the south end of the site, closer to Hyannis Harbor, that pull in off of School Street. And I'd point out, we don't usually like to pull right in off of a street and park. And then especially the 5 up to the north there. But School Street is a dead-end road. If you've been down there, it's just a little crown, and then it goes right down to the harbor, so you've got no through traffic. So there'd be much less vehicles traffic than, say, South Street, where you've got a steady flow of traffic going through the area. So it's a dead-end street, and we feel it would be safe and appropriate to have some parking on that street. We are creating a sidewalk with a different color. So there'll be an asphalt, and then there'll be a whitish sidewalk behind it to clearly delineate the pedestrian path. So right along where it says School Street there, you can see we've introduced a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk to fully upgrade to ADA compliant standards, both sides of the street. As I said, we've got town water, town sewer. The drainage is fairly straightforward. It's basically a big roof area, which you get clean runoff off the roof, and there's large dry well galley systems, mainly on the north side of the property, and some on the south of the property. As permitting goes, one of the first things you always look at on a waterfront property is Conservation Commission. So we did file with the Barnstable Conservation Commission. They had approved a very similar project some years back, so it was fairly well received. We did negotiate to remove one space from the front and put it in the back, and they got a net increase of about a 4 to 1 ratio more planting than is existing in their buffer. So they were relatively happy about that. It's an improvement over existing conditions, we feel, and I believe that they agreed. They did issue an order conditions. One of the other important things is that the Hyannis Main Street Waterfront District, we're on the very east end of that district. So Stuart and I and the architect presented plans to that committee, and we noted that on the west end, there's a hotel of the site. It's a fairly good massing, the Hyannis Harbor Motel. Where in the east end, it's kind of a bookend to the height, to the entire district. And we're getting into an area with higher buildings. We've got the greenery, the condominium off to our east, and then the hospital further to the east that are prominent on the skyline and would blend fairly well with what we're doing here. They agreed. It was a split vote, but they agreed, and it was upheld on a small appeal. So we feel pretty comfortable that that board, which is, charged with carefully looking at the aesthetics in the harbor and to make sure that everything fits well, they did approve it and upheld that decision. So I think this board and the committees that come forward could look at that as some guidance on being a fairly reasonable residential proposal. Again, nice new sidewalks. The way that this is set up is that there's a semi-private pool on the east side that's fenced in according to code, self-closing, self-latching gates. So there'll be some recreational amenities on site. You'll have the concrete decks available for barbecue and general assembly. Around the outside, there's a nice lighted rail that will go along the side of all the walkways that are adjacent to roadways. It's set up with a number of elevators that come down beneath the floor, so each individual homeowner will have access with a key code that will only open to their unit. The elevators will access multiple units, but your key code will only get you into your unit, so that's how they handle security on that. Being that it's below grade and we'll have cameras, we feel it'll be a nice, safe environment. There is handicap ramps that are needed because the deck is up a few feet. You can see on the center of the west building and on the north of the east building, there's those ADA ramps up. The rest have a short flight of stairs to access the building, and of course, most people will be parking down below and just simply take the elevator up to their unit. Again, stormwater is handled on site. We'll work with engineering if there's any further questions, but we think we've addressed everything adequately on that. Conservation issues have been addressed, and Main Street Waterfront Historic District has approved the project. But I would certainly be glad to answer any questions if you do have them. Thank you.
Steve, I'd just ask Jim to pull up the architectural renderings. There we go. And just to add a few things. The east parcel, the one that contains the restaurant, that building is proposed to house 18 units. The exterior consisting of cement fiber shingles of different shades of gray with white trim and some stonework. There would be 5 two-bedroom condominium units and 13 three-bedroom units in that building. As you can see, there are multiple porches, patio areas, as Dan pointed out, the pools to be constructed. That building would have underground parking garage with 33 spaces, and then the eight spaces along the side of School Street. A refuse shed constructed off of School Street. All the utilities will be underground, and as Dan said, new drainage facilities. The west parcel that contained the old motel still has a retaining wall foundation. That would be removed, and a new multifamily housing building containing 16 units, and that building would be constructed, again consisting of cement fiber shingles of different shades of gray with white trim and some stonework. 7 two-bedroom condominium units in that structure, and 9 three-bedroom condominium units. Again, multiple porches and patio areas, underground parking for 27 spaces. In the underneath the building with a drop-off area at street level, the refuse shed, all the utilities, again, would be underground. And then as far as community benefits, all the above-ground utility lines would be put underground, improving the view looking down South Street toward the harbor. Existing sidewalks along South Street and School Street, which do not comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, will be removed and replaced with compliant sidewalks. The intent there is to give the sidewalks essentially to the town, an easement to the town for public use, with the town to maintain the sidewalks. The reason for that is this is a passageway to and from the Steamship Authority. We don't want the condominium associations subject to the liability of somebody walking up and down those sidewalks and getting hurt. So the idea is we'll build the sidewalks and we'll grant an easement to the town allowing public use of the sidewalks. A new water main would be provided. School Street from South Street to the end of the public way near Hyannis will be paved over with a new top coat of asphalt. Crosswalks will be provided at the northerly end of School Street, where it intersects with South Street, and at the southerly end of our property near the Steamship Authority property. Vastly improved landscaping. Lighting on the condominium property maintained by the condominium association will provide street lighting along School Street, where there currently is none. Increase in town property tax revenue. New street drains will be installed in School Street with a drainage easement running in favor of the town. An electric car plug-in stations will be provided. All plumbing fixtures and units will be low water use. One vacant lot and one underutilized lot in Hyannis Harbor will be put to use for the benefit of the community, and an increase in the number of housing units, which can be counted towards the town's goal of having 10% of its housing stock affordable. So that's a quick summary of the benefits, and we'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think before we go to board questions and comments, Jim, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but wanted to see if you might be able to give us a brief overview of existing zoning to kind of set a baseline for us. In addition, I would love for you to just give us a quick overview of the Hyannis Main Street Waterfront District and essentially set that baseline as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Cupfer, Senior Planner, Planning and Development. It's actually, thank you, Dan. It's handy on the plan here, but if you don't mind, the Harbor District zoning, it's under 240. So on our E-code here on the town's website, we could go to our zoning code, which is the Harbor District. That's the location in which this property is cited under. And it has the bulk regulations there. But in addition, the plan that you have before you, the site plan, has the required versus the proposed, which I always find fairly handy on the site plan itself. So under existing zoning, and before I get into the existing zoning, I should specify, just for everyone's clarification, this is a regulatory agreement, and as you'll see within the regulatory agreement document, it's in that list of waivers, the applicant has cited each and every one of the zoning requirements that it does not meet. And you'll see a number of them here. So in the Harbor District, the minimum lot area is 20,000 square feet. The minimum lot frontage, so setback, or the distance along the roadway is 20 feet. Frontage is 20. Front setback is 20, rear setback is 10, side is 10. So distance from the lot lines to the structure, 20, 10, and 10. Maximum building height is 35 feet or 2.5 stories, and the maximum lot coverage is 70%. So that's the existing. We can go over real quick if you like the proposed. So the lot sizes for each of these do meet the requirements. One's 24,820, the other is 32,870. The lot frontage, ample lot frontage as 77 and 122 respectively. Front setbacks are 14.8 and 19.2, so just under that 20. School side is 13.4 and 10.2. Let's see, side setbacks, or on the proposed west is 11, and 9.7 on the east. Again, the required is 10. In the rear setback, the required is 10, and it's 9.1 and 9.7. As we'll note, the building height, 2.5 stories. What's proposed here is 5.5 stories. And lot coverage, the requirement is 70%, and the request is 75.7 on the west and 71.2 on the east. And secondarily, the Hyannis Historic, the applicant did propose an application before that commission. It was approved. I believe the vote was 4-1. And so it was a split vote. It was not unanimous, but it was approved 4-1.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. And Paula, did you have a question?
Here, I have,
Great.
yes, a couple questions. Thank you. Jim, the front setbacks, do those only apply to off of South Street, not School Street?
So the front setbacks would be the frontage, so it would likely apply to both School Street and South Street. Our building commissioner is not here, who is the ultimate review and guidance on that. But it would very likely apply to both South and School.
So are there waivers requested off of School Street for frontage?
Yes.
Okay, with the 20.
Yeah, we
okay.
broke it out in the zoning table. Specifically, the refuse sheds are kind of their own little thing, and then handicap ramps in front. But basically, all would need some relief from School Street front yard setback requirements.
Okay. And Jim, another question. We are going to be considering the changes to the downtown zoning code. Is the Harbor District at all included in that, or will that remain separate?
Elizabeth would be better to speak to that. Thank you.
Good morning, Elizabeth Jenkins, Director of Planning and Development. The Harbor District is included in the comprehensive rezoning of downtown Hyannis. However, the bulk and dimensional requirements that Mr. Kupfer just walked over are only minimally modified in this district. The majority of the data analysis and work that was done around the Main Street and Barnstable Road area. So without really the benefit of the planning behind the Harbor District, studying things like appropriate, potentially appropriate setbacks and height relative to those specific uses on the water, we didn't feel like it was appropriate to propose changes in that district, in the Harbor District, to the dimensional requirements at this time.
Okay, so if we do pass that, those same requirements that exist today will continue?
I shouldn't say they are exactly the same, but it maintains the 2.5 stories and the front setback. I believe there were some minor tweaks to some of the lot size and frontage elements of that zoning table, but height and setbacks remain consistent.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. And would like to go to some board discussion and questions at this time. For me, certainly, significant ask with a number of waivers. And again, you can see the full list of waivers in the draft regulatory agreement under Section 23. So with that, certainly there's a discussion that needs to be had. And it's a significant project, a key site, very close to the water, and just needs to be looked at carefully. So for me, the challenges for me, proximity to the coastal bank, definitely want to talk to conservation about that, parking, density, and height. Those are my kind of key concerns right off the bat. So if we could go around the board, and Steve, if you could lead us off.
Thank you, Steve. There's certainly, we've seen this project a few times in terms of initial presentation, then formal presentation at the planning board. So I'm just kind of working through, in terms of the concept of the project and the look and feel, I think is really excellent. My concerns kind of mirror Steve's in terms of height being something that we can never change. So to think about how this project will essentially be viewed in perpetuity going forward is something that I think I really want to think hard about and understand. if that's something that we can kind of all either live with or not live with. When Steve and I were talking initially about the need for a subcommittee, my personal opinion was that, having been on the planning board for several years now, the fact that we do our work, we spend a lot of time kind of really digging into every project, and I hope we do it efficiently and professionally, which I believe we do. With that being said, having ultimately the town council be kind of the final arbitrator of agreements that move forward or not, I just felt that having a subcommittee where we could all weigh in and have the counselors be part of that discussion on the front end not only makes our outcome much better, I think it provides a much better service to folks that are presenting projects like this. So, they don't get over one hurdle and then at the very end kind of be stumped because, potentially there wasn't enough information or there wasn't enough discussion on the front end with really all the people that need to participate in the discussion. So I just have a few things in mind that I just want to clarify. From the site plan itself, as you're looking at that overview, I'm noticing kind of some parking that's at the very south end of the project. Is that part of the additional parking, or is that the adjacent landowners' parking, if we're looking at that on the left side there at the very bottom of the page?
So on the west side, the portion that is not colored in is the Steamship Authority.
Okay.
There was a little house there until recently. They took it down and put in a little parking lot. So that's the Steamship Authority.
Okay, and there's no access from School Street to that steamship lot, is that correct?
No, no, actually, to the contrary, that is how they get in and out of there, but I think it's mainly employee parking. It's utilized, I've noticed, but not heavily. So they had, just to the south of that, say Double Bay there is their office building, but so there's a little bit of pedestrian ticketing in and out of there, but mainly people get them online, I assume, and just get in line on the west, on those larger, a lot of people bring their vehicles, and the main foot traffic is not through this area. But it's a little parking area. We just kind of look out over it, and not part of this project at all, except that it happens to be adjacent to us.
Okay, so I'm just thinking long-term potential for lost drivers or people trying to park in what seem to be very limited on-street parking spots. And I'm assuming those are going to be deemed either resident parking, or are they going to be deemed kind of 2-hour limited parking, just in terms of, overflow, because, points have been made in terms of probably 9 months out of the year, this is going to be, I want to say limited use, but I can see the realistic parking needs would be quite different than in the summertime when you have guests visiting. You've got, a significant amount of 3-bedroom units versus 2-bedroom units. So that in and of itself is going to lead to probably additional parking needs, probably in those important summer months. And I'm just throwing out ideas in terms of how to make that part of this project a little more palatable in terms of congestion in this area and the likelihood of people needing to park. I know that this high-end project requires certain amenities, so I'm just thinking about how important, the parking issues are versus, the need for, say, the pool area and things like that. I'm just thinking about how to carve it out a little bit differently, and I'm not hung up on it, but I just want to kind of express that. And then if we could just look at the elevation from the street view as well. Yeah, that's the one, Elizabeth. So let's just count kind of the stories here. So the building on the right. So if we're looking at the grade where the individuals are sort of walking there, we're talking about, would we consider that 1 story, and then up above where the columns are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then almost 7 where the roof line ends? Is that how you would count that?
So it's set up right now, and the scale of this isn't perfect. You know, the people are probably a little small in front of that stairway because the stairway is only about 5 feet above grade. But the definition of a story is pretty carefully defined in the downtown zoning district. And we worked to make sure that the finished grade all the way around the outside was more than halfway up that lower parking level, so that actually would not be counted as a story. It's simply adjusting the grades up and making sure that it's depressed enough so that you do not count it as a story. So while it's visible, it's, it'll be maybe not quite like this building, but there'll be some that's above grade, but mostly below grade on that lower level. So technically, that would not be a story, and you just count the stories above it. So that would be 5, and then the attic area, there's a couple of the units towards the water that have a little bit of loft space, and that would be the half story above the 5 main levels.
And the overall height would be what at its highest point?
So the height does vary very slightly, but per the zoning table there, on the west building, when you measure from the finished grade plane, which is how the regular building code does it, and I believe, well, let's just leave it at that. It's 69 feet, but that's to the midplane of the highest roof. The Hyannis zoning right now, you measure from the natural grade plane, so it'd be 71.76 feet. On the west building, that same number is a little lower. It's 68.81 feet from the natural grade plane. So the east building is a little higher on the hill, so it's set in a little bit more, so that's slightly lower. The west building is slightly higher, but right around 69 to 72 feet from natural grade plane to the. And when we're measuring to the highest roof, it's not the absolute peak, but very close to it. Yeah, and just for reference, John mentioned that it's actually identical ridge height to this building, so they're fairly good-sized buildings.
Right, okay. That's kind of my initial, I'm not making any kind of determination at this point. I'm just sort of, the height is really the overall project, and I think we can probably mitigate some of the potential issues with parking and waste removal and things of that nature. I'm personally just kind of giving you my initial reaction has really always been just the height of the project itself, and I'm going to be kind of mindful of that as we continue to discuss the project. That's all my comments for the moment.
Thank you, Steve. Jen?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I think I agree with Steve on a lot of what he said. I like the colors. It's much better than the project we looked at a few years ago. It's enormous. And that is definitely a point of discussion that I hope we can hammer out. I think 71.6 feet is really looming. And, our responsibility on the council is to bring forth our constituents' fears and concerns. And when you think about coming into Hyannis Harbor and seeing a monstrous development, what does that say about our town versus going into Nantucket Harbor? I'm not saying keep it small and make it like piddly. I think there's somewhere to get in the middle here. And I don't want to intimate that I'm not interested in the project. I am. I think my precinct needs a lift. I think condos that are developed properly and aesthetically are appropriate for the site. I have concerns about the height. I have concerns about the parking. These are all things you're going to hear. You knew you were going to hear me say it anyway. I have concerns about the parking. I have concerns about the parking spaces underneath and how we're going to augment what we need. If people have a 3-bedroom condo and have people stay over, where do they park? Landscaping is a big one when you're walking along South Street. And I don't think that this is appropriate landscaping. What I'm looking at now, I realize that's a small tweak, but it's an important one. I worry about precedent that we might be setting for the future with a 5.5-story building on the harbor in Hyannis. Maybe Jim could speak to the height of buildings in what are the tallest buildings in town? If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cullum. Actually, Dan, do you still have, we do have a graphic that was provided by the applicant, and I believe it has the heights of the hospital nearby, the apartment just behind it, and this town hall. And so there's varying heights. Let's see if we can pull it up. Dan, do you recall what it was entitled?
Might have been a height comparison. Oh, the architect did this one. I don't know if you ended up with this little document or
Yeah,
not.
they did.
But I guess one of the things I would say is that elevation above sea level is probably the most important when you're looking from the harbor in. So the ridge of the Lewis Bay Court condominium, that what I call the greenery, just to the east of us, which doesn't show on this particular sketch, is 93.5 feet above mean sea level. We're at 99.3 feet above sea level, so 6 feet more than them. We are a little bit proud of them, so that it'll appear just, the perspective view will be a little bit stronger, but it's very comparable, especially when you go to a distance of the same height as that. The winner, I guess, is the Cape Cod Hospital. That's, it's an institutional structure in Barnstable. There used to be no height limit. I believe when we redeveloped it back in 2001 frame, they just asked what height we'd like, and Pat Butler says, well, about 85 feet, so that's what they put in the code. The mechanical penthouse was not counted as typical, and that does go somewhat higher. The very highest of that is about 127 feet above sea level. So that's, a good 20, 25, 27 or more feet above where we are. But again, depending on the perspective, you're a little bit closer with these than you would be because the hospital is set back. And that's just simple, perspective view that you learn in school, that the closer something is, the higher it'll appear on the skyline. So it's not, gigantic, and honestly, standing on the shore, the little lighthouse looks higher, but obviously that's, you all understand that something that's quite close will be higher. But here's a distant view. This is from out in the middle of Lewis Bay. So say you're on the ferry coming in. This is just to show that it's not some gigantic, strike on the skyline. On the west there, the ridge of Town Hall is just visible with the two little chimneys. That's elevation 99.2, so it's an identical height above sea level that we are. And interestingly, the grade plane is very similar to, we're up on a little bit of a hill. Here, we're up on a little bit of a hill in the building we're sitting in. The communications tower is up at 137, but that's obviously, not a habitable structure. And so then you see us in the middle there, 99.3, Lewis Bay Court at 93.3, and the hospital, the big brick accent band, is about 120, and the little box above that about 127. So that's the landscape as you see across it, and yeah, the new addition has been scaled down a bit, so it'll be less than the other one, but it'll be a similar massing to what's there now. To the west, probably about where the lower band is on that height.
The hospital tower.
Yeah, the hospital addition tower that's currently been permitted through the Cape Cod Commission and is under construction.
I do think it's gigantic. I'm not, I mean, when you look at this, when you look at the presentation and you look at what we have in town now, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying I think it's gigantic. And I think that will be primarily what people say when the public is involved in discourse as well. So I think we should be prepared to answer that. I also would like to see maybe what the positive tax base contribution would be moving forward. And I wonder about a covenant to disallow short-term rentals in these units. I just feel like it's something that we should do to protect neighborhoods. I feel it's gigantic, but I'm willing to talk about all of it.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that. And one thing I would point out, too, is that this harbor is sort of an industrial scale with a big, Uncatina ferries, 3.5 stories high, coming in and unloading tractor trailers. And there's a lot of big things. Wayne's got these huge storage buildings that are, similar massing or bigger, right nearby. But, point taken, it is, you're going to have to digest that it's a pretty good-sized structure if it's going to go through as permitted.
Can I ask the number of parking spots that are underground? I can find it, I'm sure, in the documents. It'll take me a while. And what relief you're looking for with regard to the parking and how we get our head around 3-bedroom units and the discrepancy with the parking, that's going to be a really big issue, I think. And I like I said, no decisions made yet. I just want to talk about it,
Absolutely, yeah.
We meet the current requirements for parking in the zoning code. We're required to have 1.5 spaces per unit. I don't have the exact number in front of me. Do you have it, Dan?
Yeah, it's broken out on the site plan in the upper right there because it is a very important issue. So on 115, which is the west, I guess if we could start with that one, there's 16 units, 1.5 per dwelling unit plus 1 visitor space per 10 required units. So 16 times 1.5 is 24. And then plus 3 visitors, rounding up, is 27. There's 29 provided, including 2 handicap. There's 27 spaces under that west building, and we're counting 2 at street level. And we just note, too, that there's some drop-off spots for Uber drivers and, Meals on Wheels, that sort of thing. On the east, we've got 18 units. It's a little bit bigger site. To shortcut it, 30 are required. There's 41 provided, including 2 van handicaps. So there's 33 under the east building, plus 8 at street level. And there's also a drop-off area, loading area provided. I would note, in all fairness, some of those under the building are double parked. So if you look at the list of required waivers, although we're over, some of those are double parked. Which, if you have a family, isn't the end of the world, but does need some coordination and some relief. But again, 33 under the east building and 27 under the west. And so we technically meet the code. The trends for parking, I don't know if they'll go down in the near future. Mr. Bornstein thinks that they will, but we do currently meet code anyway, as waived.
If I, from what I've read, is correct, I think the new downtown zoning is going from 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit to 1, is what's proposed for downtown.
I don't know if that's feasible, honestly. We are we have 4 cars in my family, and there's, 3 of us. I don't know. So I just think we need to be conscious about what reality hands us and what codes say. I just want to make sure that we're clear about that because, as we move on and maybe it's a more walkable city, that's one thing. But at the present moment, I'm not convinced that 1-to-1 ratio works. Just based upon my own experience living here year round.
We're 1.5.
1.5 now, right? But when
it's going to 1.
Going to 1, I don't know how that works, but. So those are my concerns. I guess one other quick thing that I have to say I would like to see is a little more for the neighborhood, a little more for the precinct. The dockside has been an eyesore for years now, and I'm thankful that we're looking at redevelopment of it. But I feel like a project of this size might be handled better by the community if there was something given back to the community for it. And I realize this is a reg agreement and that's all on the table, so that's why I'm bringing it up. I think the landscaping is lacking enormously. So, just something to make us feel better about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And Paula?
Thank you. And I echo some of the concerns that have already been brought. The density and height of this project is of concern. And I know that community character is something we bring up in a lot of our conversations when we're looking at zoning ordinances or regulatory agreements. And I think that is going to be definitely top of the list on this one. Even though a regulatory agreement is not necessarily a precedent-setting event, it definitely opens the possibilities of a project of this size being replicated in other parts of our harbor district. So this would not be a one and done. In my estimation, if it went forward, it definitely could be a template for other projects going forward. So I think it's very important for us to consider the scale and scope of this project. I know I was at a housing production forum about a week ago, and there were concerns about other projects that have been approved in town, definitely not in our harbor district, in our industrial areas, that the scale and scope seemed like, how did that get passed? Yeah, how did we allow that to happen? And I think, as first Steve said, this is something that once it's up, it's not coming down, and people will. We don't want that question to be on the top of people's mind when they're coming into our downtown Hyannis Harbor District. The other concern I have, in addition to making sure if this project goes forward as presented or modified, is that ratio of community benefits to the benefits derived by the regulatory agreement. I mean, again, we have this opportunity in our town to do a regulatory agreement. Most communities don't. You've got zoning. You can go before, ask for a variance or for some special permitting process, but our reg agreement allows to really open the doors and ask for what you want. And as has been brought up, there are 34 waiver requests here. So there's a lot of things that are being requested that do not conform to our existing zoning. One of the issues that is obviously near and dear to my heart is housing for all in our community. Obviously, this is being presented not necessarily to us today, but as a luxury condominium project, but I'm sure that that is where the price points are going to be. And I will be very interested in knowing a little bit more on the economics of this project as we go forward. Yes, it will be an addition to our tax base. Yes, it is a good site for redevelopment, but I think the numbers have to make a lot of sense in terms of how is the whole community benefiting. And one of those areas is in the affordable component. The project obviously requests that any affordable units are not on site and are put somewhere else. I can maybe work with that, but I also have a concern that what is replaced or what is being presented meets the sort of economic value that is being presented here for the developer. And the past performance of affordability has not been well documented, and so that will be definitely a _1 concern for me. Yes, we have inclusionary zoning. Yes, that's considered 10% of the number of units. Yes, we sometimes go under the 10% rather than going over the 10%. But that is not, in a reg agreement, that is not something that we necessarily have to go by. We can go by a higher percentage if we feel like that is how we're going to derive a community benefit. So I will be looking at that, and that will be a major concern for me. Again, overall, as a development, housing in this area is not a problem for me, but I think some of the specifics are going to be things I'll be most concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And before we go to Hilda, Jen, I think you had another comment?
I do. Thank you I'm sorry to take, I just want to make a couple of comments. I feel like, Hyannis forever has been the ground zero for affordable housing. I'm all about luxury housing on the harbor. I think that's an awesome move for my precinct. It doesn't bother me that it's luxury housing. I hope you can sell it. I hope that works. I am not opposed to that at all. I think it would really benefit us in general in Hyannis to have a higher ticket price, considering the last 20 years of, everything that's been sewered in town being the target for, various organizations to move in and change the face of neighborhoods. So I believe in giving Hyannis the shot in the arm that it needs, and this could be a driver for that. I also want to say very clearly for the record that we can't keep saying no to everything, right? I mean, I think we need to be a little more flexible in our thinking and our model of the way people actually want to live. Not everybody wants a house on an acre of land and all the maintenance involved. I just want to make sure we're keeping our eyes and minds and ears open to possibilities for Hyannis moving forward. So I don't want my comments to be perceived as me saying no out of the gate. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying these are concerns to get to yes, and a pathway forward. But I am absolutely all about lifting Hyannis. It's been 11 years for me now of fighting for Hyannis on the council. And I can see this as something that would elevate us. And that was the conversation we had years ago, Mr. Bornstein, when we were in the other room talking about this project that I eventually voted down. But so I just want to make sure everybody understands that my point of view is to stop saying no to everything. We can't do that. It's just not the way the world is working. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Jen. Hilda?
Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful project. I love the layout of it, and having more houses in Hyannis or in Barnstable and a whole is a plus for our community. The downfall for me with that is the regular people who live here will not be able to afford these. And a lot of people who work around here, price range for their average hourly wages or pay is like $15 to $18, $20. It all depends on where you're at. And for a project like this, I know even the people, it would be interested to find out from town managers, what is a basic salary for your IREs? Would somebody from the town be able to buy one of these condos? I'm not against, I love the housing, I love the project. I love even the height and the density because that's what we need to be able to bring more housing in Barnstable. My concern is the people who live here, where are we pushing them? As a regular person on the road who works and hustle every day, or every week working 50, 60, 70 hours a week just to make ends meet, I would like to know where does these people fall in line with this project. My question is, for the low income, we're supposed to have like 3 there. Are these 3 low income housing gonna be on this property? And if they are not, where are they going to be located? We want specific address, specific answers to that. Where are they going to be located? What's the cost going to be for one of those when they are outside of this project? When will they be finished? We need every inch of it on paper so we can hold this company accountable. And the sidewalk parking, my question for that is, will the general public be able to use those parking spots? Would it be a conflict with residents of the condo and the public? We all know that in summer months, it gets really crazy with parking. So for a visitor who comes here and probably just want to go over to Nantucket or go somewhere else and park, will they be told? Will we be having problems with that? We need to address that, please. One second. And I would like to know, what is the real reason for moving the low-income houses from off this property? Could you just explain that to us, please?
Certainly. These are extraordinarily expensive units to build. There's no way this project can afford to have 10% of them as affordable. The economics don't work, and we'll show that. I mean, you've all raised some very interesting comments, but to me, the largest community benefit that you're all overlooking is that our client is willing to make a multi-million-dollar investment into the east end of Hyannis. Nobody else is doing that. Councilor Hersey, you talked about going to a housing production meeting. I wish you would all take a look at the 10% affordable. There have been projects approved in downtown Hyannis that haven't been built. multiple projects in downtown Hyannis that have gone through this process and haven't been built. The 10% affordable in downtown Hyannis shouldn't exist. In 2014, this town did a study. The number one housing need in this community was market rate rental properties. How many have been built since then? We finally have a project out in the industrial park, but you're pushing all of the development through the growth incentive zone to downtown Hyannis. You have small parcels. We don't have a redevelopment authority. We don't bring parcels together to do larger projects. So you have small parcels. Everybody thinks they're worth a lot of money, which the parcels are. So you have to build up. So you're pushing the development down. You got to expect the buildings to go up, and it's going to happen more and more. We don't need more affordable housing in downtown Hyannis. We need market rate housing. Will the people that work on Main Street that make 15 to 20 bucks an hour be able to afford these? No. But we're putting people with a lot of money on the east end of Hyannis. They're going to walk to the restaurants and to the shops where all these people work, and they benefit that way. To me, all of that is being overlooked here. This is a development in the east end of Hyannis that has some serious issues. And this guy's willing to make this investment. That's the number one community benefit, and nobody's recognizing that. So yeah, it is high, but you're talking about going to 4 stories in downtown Hyannis. Why? Because it's expensive to build. Why is this one 5.5 stories? Because he's put the parking underground, which is extremely expensive to build, and instead of having a parking lot on the Hyannis Harbor as you come into town. Councilor Cullum, you asked, okay, what's going to be a reaction when you see this large building in downtown Hyannis versus Nantucket? To me, it's going to be, wow, look at that. It's a beautiful building. What's your reaction coming into Hyannis right now? Let's get in our car and get out of here. To me, this is a really, really beautiful structure. I didn't grow up in Hyannis, but I lived in Hyannis. I'm a past president of the Chamber of Council of Hyannis. I'm a supporter of Hyannis. But that end of town it needs investment. And this is a leap of faith that I think, I understand all your concerns, and we're willing to discuss and address those, but you've got to understand, buildings are going to go up. You're pushing development downtown where the infrastructure to support it is, so it's got to go higher. And I really wish you would look at that 10%, because it's putting caps on and reducing the production of housing, the housing that we need.
I am not against I love it because the density counts, as you say, the cost of living, and everyone wanting to build on an acre or half-acre land is not possible on the Cape right now. So the density and the height, I have no problem with it. I think it's a beautiful project. My concern is just for the poorer class of people. You know, I would like to know definitely where is the location of that other 3 units going to be?
310 Barnstable Road. We actually have submitted a draft regulatory agreement and application to the planning staff, but that's kind of sitting. If the zoning changes for downtown Hyannis go through, we won't need a regulatory agreement for that project. But the intent is 310 Barnstable Road. It's as you come off the airport rotary, past the Staples Plaza, and the road splits. Winter Street goes to the right and Barnstable Road goes straight. It's right there on the left near, near Taco Bell and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
And right behind Staples. It's a nice central location, easy to walk to jobs. It's a nice site for apartments, in my opinion.
Walking distance to Main Street.
310 Barnstable Road. So we can get you some information on that so you can review it.
I would love to.
Yeah.
My next question, what are the size of these units going to be?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not well-versed, but I would just ask the proposed or the affordable ones? Is that what you're
Yes,
asking
the
about?
affordable ones.
Yeah.
Mr. Bornstein would like to make a few comments. I think he can answer some of your questions.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to just give you an overview of the project. We employ close to 200 people, where probably half of them are in the Hyannis, Barnstable area. And very few of them make less than $800 to $1,000. That's our bottom level. We've given 3 raises to people this year just to keep up with inflation. We're very cognizant of our workforce, and we understand their problems. we're in it, we're involved with it. We really understand. I saw the people at Captain's Village that is being rented out now, and they're renting them out for $2,500. Our 310, our most expensive unit, market rate, is $1,800 to $1,900 on a two-bedroom. The one-bedrooms are $1,500 to $1,600. Our rents are below market. There's nothing wrong with them. We just understand what our clientele is and can afford it. And some of our people in our apartments been in there for 25 years. They don't leave. We take good care of them. But let me address your issues. 310 is proposing 30 units. We only may end up with 29, but we have 3 affordable units alone for that development, plus 3 more for the dockside, which is 6 units. And the affordable rates, now that they're, and again, they could change, we're running 1,300 and 1,500 in round numbers for apartments, for the affordables. As a matter of fact, what's interesting, and I bring this up as something that everybody should be cognizant of, our construction cost, and we're only using $300,000 a unit. The Housing Authority tells me they're running $430,000 a unit. At the end of the day, after we subtract the expenses, just using 3 affordables, not the 6, just our net income after no amortization, just dollar to dollar, we're $181,000 loss every year, just running 30 market rate units with 3 affordables. We're going to have 6. And this is underrated because we know that construction is going to be more money, but we did this so there's credibility that you can't argue with the number. So for the next 20 years, we're going to be losing over $200,000 on this project every year. We're going to absorb it with our other businesses to supply housing in Hyannis at the $1,800, $1,900, $1,500 a month. I don't have, this is something above and beyond. We just do this. We're part of the fabric here. We pay a lot of taxes every year, and we understand what we're dealing with the town. And what makes it even hurts more, we got to advertise these affordables. I have at the Cape Cod Times building, 18 months, 2 brand new units been sitting empty, because there was no housing authority to get some affordable people in there. And when they leave, we got to re-advertise it again and start the process again. So I point this out, if you're part of housing, we should fix this affordable. You got a waiting line for 300 people want to get an affordable, but we can't put them in until you have a lottery around the whole United States, apparently. So these things are sitting empty. I pointed out, like I said, this is on what you're talking about. I hope I answered your question on it. It's all brand new construction, whole building's got it. They range from 800 to 1,200 feet. They're normal size what's being built here. And you ask what our tax, we expect the dockside to be someplace between $740,000 and $850,000 in tax revenue a year. We don't expect any school kids to live in that building. Most of it's going to be older people. And the 3rd bedroom we talk about, we've seen 3rd bedrooms, over half of them are closets because closet space is limited. And the only time they really get used is when grandkids come down for a weekend. And that's what the 3rd bedroom's about. But these are basically 2 people living in a unit. I mean, we've got data on this. We have built hundreds of these things. So the 3-bedroom was we could do it. The idea, if you had your grandkids come down, you want a place to put them, and we want to run foul of any laws. And as far as rentals, there is no rentals. We allow only 1 rental a year. It can be for a month or for a year. People in this price category don't rent their units out. They're afraid what could happen. So there's literally no rentals on this. And on amount of parking and cars, I'd like to address that. We did the Cape Cod Times. we had people that never thought they'd live downtown. These are professional people. And we have, I think, 22 or 23, I'm not sure how many apartments, maybe it's 21, I just don't remember. My son did that one. And if you go back there, there's not even 15 cars in the parking lot. Today with Uber and everything, and cars are expensive, they don't require 2 cars. They tend to stay locally. It's a 1 car. You go down there, it's anytime you like, going back of that parking lot at 9 o'clock at night. We just don't have the car density anymore that we used to have. Owning a car is a $7,000 or $8,000 item. People get older, they don't require 2 cars. They take an Uber for $10 or $15, and that's the end of it. And I say this because if it was a problem, we'd have to deal with it. But around this project, there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 parking lots that rent out cars that have parking spaces for $25 a day. If it was a problem, there's overage. But we don't think we're going to have a car problem. Matter of fact, in the garage, every car will have an electric car parking station built in. And I mean, just to give you an idea, and when we went to the, I tell you all this because all this stuff is running around my head. We went to the banks and said, what we're building. And we told them what the price of these things. They said, you're going to do what? In Hyannis? They didn't believe this. We're using our own family money on this because we just don't think, this is a leap in faith for Hyannis. I mean, this project's going to cost us over $60,000 out of pocket. This is a leap in faith. This is a legacy project. I'm tired of hearing about, I don't want to come to downtown. Let's go someplace else. We deal with it. We've lost a lot of tenants from downtown. We run hotels, and we have the only, I think, what I call a 5-star hotel. They come in from Chatham to stay in this hotel for overflows. And we show if you build it, they'll come. We're building it. It's a great project. I don't think parking is going to be an issue. Height, yeah, it's a little taller, but economically, we just couldn't make everything work. The underground parking with the 8 elevators and the infrastructure we're putting in, that alone is over $8 million. That's a year-old price. I just got notice our elevators went up $240,000, and I don't know what else went up. But it's not a big money project for what we can sell for and what our cost is. It's pretty narrow. I mean, it's almost stupid if you want to really look at, there's better things we could do with our money. But I've been trying to do this since 1997. I've been here 3 times, and I've heard they didn't like the design, they didn't like anything. We went through 86 different architects. He's probably listening to this, probably going to raise his price now, I don't know, but I got a contract. And we went to 86 different architects. I spent 6-7 months from Denmark, England, Canada, Seattle, Nantucket, and we spent a lot of time on it. But if we don't get the number of units we need there, it doesn't work. The infrastructure costs, we're spending over $1 million between the sidewalks, the road, the pipework, bringing the lines down. I mean, I don't even know what it is anymore. It's changed so much. But this is for the town of Barnstable. This is a legacy project. You'll never see another person build anything like this. This is a reach. It really is. And I hope, any questions I can answer while I'm up here?
Well, I appreciate all those comments too, Mr. Bornstein. That was great, very educational. Anybody with any questions for Mr. Bornstein?
No, I would just say a couple things. And Mr. Kenny's, impassioned plea. This is not Santa Claus giving something to the town. There's the reason for the regulatory agreement, and there's a point of having this discussion. Clearly, the opinions are different in terms of the perception of the height and what that means. And I think to Paula's point, we are setting a precedence. We're talking about what else is going to happen, and you can't look at this strictly on its own, because I do think, look at the property across the street from Spanky's. That's, a motel that I assume has much better value and use than what it's currently being used as, which I don't even know if it's operational. So clearly that potentially could be an additional opportunity for someone who may want to develop that, and with essentially a 6-story building, that's going to probably weigh heavy on someone's mind as what's realistic, what can be approved. But I think the height part of it can't be thrown out the window just because of what you need to take in terms of the revenue part of it. I understand that. The elevation of the property, I think, creates a much larger structure than just the 6 stories. Had that been on sort of sea level, which obviously may not be a good idea right now anyway, just in terms of that view alone, we have to really think about that. And I guess really just the final thought for Mr. Bornstein is that I 100% agree that bringing a higher-end product into Hyannis is important. Increasing the tax base is certainly important. But I guess in terms of the money you're spending, I know you're not doing it for free. Ultimately, you've weighed the cost benefit, even though your margins, as you describe, are very thin. That being said, if you have to think about making any accommodation to how this layout is currently done and you don't think it makes sense, then that's really the decision that you and your family will need to come to if in fact it seems as though there's no flexibility on that. And if that's the case, then I think it's a lose-lose for the town of Barnstable. So I'm in favor of a win-win. We just need to make sure that we agree with how that can be done.
Thank you.
Well said, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Bornstein. Steve, I really appreciate those comments. I echo a lot of them. Ultimately, this is a negotiation, and I do believe that some compromise will need to be made. You heard from all 5 members that we all would like to see this happen. But first, I think there has to be some compromise. Before I get into my questions and comments, is there any additional? Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Steve Costello just said. I tire of the argument that where would Hyannis be without investors like Mr. Bornstein? It's an old argument because we would be, I'm thankful. It's not that I'm not thankful, but, we have a lot of other market rate stuff that just went up. So I don't really feel like it's the end all be all. And I really I tire of that argument that if it weren't for Mr. Bornstein, there'd be people shooting up over at the dockside or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, we have problems. We're an urban area. This is definitely true. And as I said, I'm open-minded and don't want to say no to everything. But there has to be a dialogue and a compromise in moving forward, because in the end of the day, you're part of the community. You aren't the community. You're part of the community, and we all need to work together with that. So it frustrates me to hear that come out of the gate, honestly, that, because we have the Rob Brennan project on Pleasant Street that's been an awesome market rate addition to our main street in our neighborhood. So I'm not going to take the bait on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. All set. Go ahead, Paula.
Set for now. I have many more questions, but I think we'll leave it for another meeting.
Sure, absolutely. Appreciate that. So I have quite a bit I wanted to ask and say. First off, just speaking to affordable housing, I echo a lot of what Hilda said, and I appreciate her perspective on that. There have been many projects that have taken place at less than 10%. For me to vote favorably on this needs to exceed 10% significantly. And I'll just say that right out of the gate. I want to talk about the coastal bank. I do still consider myself a beginner in this, and this is my first project that is this close to the waterfront, at a significant height above the waterfront. So one of the first questions I had on the plan, it shows the dockside property. There's a line on there that says, see section 33958 for new low building approved this area. Mr. Ojala, do you know what that refers to?
Sure. Again, Dan Ojala from Downcape Engineering. Just to kind of set the stage for this, this is a highly developed area of Hyannis Harbor. There was a license to actually fill in a portion of the harbor. That's that bulkhead you see down by the H in Hyannis Harbor there, and that extends to the south. There's a number of licensed piers there, but you actually have to have the governor sign a license to fill part of the common tidelands of the Commonwealth. So that was done. That creates a bit of an artificial coastal bank down there. And then the entire scope of this was scraped and reformed by man back in in that time frame, 50s, 60s, 70s. And there's a swimming pool about where all the green is on our plan now. So what that specifically refers to is that, and then I guess the reason for that background is the commission then does look at this a little bit differently than a pristine site. So in other words, if you have a clear water stream with trout in it or something, they're going to want a very extensive buffer. Here, we've got a steel bulkhead, a paved parking lot, all down gradient to the resource area. And so they took a look at it, and they actually approved, through Brayman Engineering and Mr. Kirker, a building, a low building, basically touching the coastal bank. And again, it's a somewhat of a technical coastal bank. The coastal bank definition, you look at the slope and where the flood zone hits, and if it's over a certain percentage, then it becomes a coastal bank. If it's a little bit under it, it perhaps wouldn't be one. But there's a break where it says all those little numbers down there determined. There's a nice flat shelf on there. And so the Conservation Commission actually did approve another building seaward of our building, right in that very area. So here's a photograph of it here. I could submit it for the file, but Darcy could, that's I believe online now. You can look up that SC number and pull the plans out for yourself. I believe Mr. Kirker has kept this current. It may have lapsed. It was a few years ago that he got it permitted, but he's usually pretty good about keeping things updated. We do have a view easement over that area. So and just to throw out there, the deck of the existing dockside, he'll be below that, so it wouldn't block our view, just in case you're curious. But it would be like a low maintenance type building with perhaps, it says showers, laundry, office for the marina. So it's somewhat of a water-dependent use, which does, I think, help the permitting somewhat. But I think the point remains that it's well-developed seaward of our property. And then I did misstate a little bit. For the record, it's 3 times the amount of impervious. So we took a look at when you do these things, you look at the 0 to 50 and 50 to 100 foot setbacks from a coastal bank. And again, it's a man form, it's man-made, but we'll still concede that it is, and it actually went through a court process to prove it, but that is a state and local coastal bank. So from the 0 to 50 foot buffer, we're actually going down 200 square foot. So you look at the amount of hardscape that's within that inner buffer, and it's actually gone down. Between the 50 and 100, where they're not as concerned, but they'll still take the mitigation for it, we went up 852. So the balance was, what we do with those numbers is you multiply by 3 and 4 any increase or decrease in those zones. So you ended up with a requirement for that new balance of, say, 600 square foot, about 3 times that amount. So 1784 square foot required, and we provided 2326 square foot of new mitigation. In other words, you pull up lawn, you pull up hardscape, pavement, decking, and you replace it with native mitigation plantings. A heavy, and Hawk Design had done up a separate plan, but it's echoed basically with this sheet here that revegetates that area, and so it creates a little bit better buffer. Again, it's a highly developed area. There's a licensed bulkhead, a parking lot that's licensed, and other features that have been licensed and permitted seaward of us, but nonetheless, we do fully comply with all the current requirements from the Conservation Commission on the project, including stormwater controls, and so they did issue an order on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And could you just state where the existing dockside restaurant falls? I know it's somewhere where the eastern building is.
Yeah, so you just want to flip, instead of sheet 1, you'd go to sheet 3, and that would show the existing conditions if you want to look precisely. But it's basically in the area of the seaward side of the east parcel. So I don't know if that's a good enough answer. I could ghost it in the background if you'd like, but it's basically, you can see there's quite a bit of that deck within the 50. It's it's a somewhat similar footprint, but there's an extensive deck that's being removed from the 50, and that's where the couple hundred square foot go down. And so
Okay.
that's the same general area as the proposal on the east, but you'd have to flip down a couple of sheets to see it. Yeah, there you go. So there's
Oh,
a big
perfect.
deck system all within the 50, and then a little bit of paved parking up in the northeast corner within the 50, and quite a bit between the 50 and the 100.
Okay,
So
I
that's
appreciate
all-
that.
Yeah, that's redevelopment, would call that.
And obviously, with this new structure, we have considerable additional weight, and I'm sure it can be assumed that sufficient engineering has gone into supporting that weight and protecting that coastal bank, because it is a considerable incline.
Absolutely. You would certainly look at the angular repose of the sand and make sure that your zone of influence is well back from any coastal bank like that. And I could assure you 100% certainty that there's no influence of the footings of this building on that coastal bank stability. It's very safe design.
Excellent, appreciate that. I wanted to go back to the height. Elizabeth, do you mind pulling up the elevation from South Street? Again, I've been on this board for many years, but I still consider myself a bit of a beginner. So, to me, the calculation of stories almost seems like a creative method. If you count up the stories from the columns, if you're looking at the western building in this image, counting up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then those two double-hung windows together, I mean, to me, to a layperson, it looks like that is a story. What exactly leads to that not being defined as a story and being defined as a half story? I know it was mentioned that that is not an independent unit. That's a loft of the upper unit. Can you just speak to why that's considered a half story and not a full story?
So that's carefully defined in the regulations, and you look at the square footage of those areas, and they're, I believe, less than 50% of the floor below, and you wouldn't have to call it as a story. That's from memory. I would stand, I could certainly submit the exact definitions for you. If it's a matter of, well, yeah, I would just leave it at that. Yeah, it's different. Towns are different. Some are 66%, and Barnstable could be one of them, but most are 50% of the floor below. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. For me, the height remains a concern. Again, would love to see this project move forward, but the height for me is significant. Lewis Bay Court across the street, 47.3 feet from grade, and this is considerably more. I did want to ask, are you aware, is Jim aware, does Lewis Bay Court have a covenant disallowing short-term rentals? Do we happen to know that information?
I don't know off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman, but I'm happy to get that information for you.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. And
Short-term rentals.
is that something that you'd be open to?
Absolutely, yes.
Appreciate that. Okay, great. I think that's it for me for now. I do want to hear from, we're an hour and a half into the meeting, and I do think it would be beneficial to schedule an additional subcommittee meeting. For me, I do want to shoot some questions off to the fire department, conservation, historic, building, and DPW. I think that might be a lot to bite off at this meeting. And I wonder if potentially we set an additional meeting to hear from those various departments. Do we have any board comment on that proposal?
I think that would be helpful.
I would agree with that.
I too.
Great. And in terms of this meeting, is there any additional comment? I think we might seek to wrap it up at this point and set up another meeting. Any additional comments?
I think it's a good start. I think it's going to take, another meeting to really make sure we can kind of come to some sort of agreement as far as where we may all kind of land in terms of what we think is going to fly versus what the applicant may, perceive as must-haves versus, deal killers. So I think we want to at least get to that point, and I think we can probably do it in one more meeting.
I have one additional thing to say. The project, the 310 Barnstable that Mr. Bernstein is talking about, would that project be finished in time or in line with Dockside? Or what's the time frame on that project?
That's a great question. Could you speak to that now?
Mr. Bornstein says before, it'll be finished before this project.
We're actually ready to start it. We're just waiting for the, hopefully, the changeover of the zoning without having to go through a regulatory. But we do have a regulatory on file, but we're ready to go. I have one tenant in there that's vacating around the middle to the tail end of October. We built him a new space. So the building's all empty. We've got our bids in from our subs. It might take a month to ratchet up to start gutting and doing what we're gonna do, but this building's about 4 month, 5 month to finish. So I would say by March, April, it'll be move-in, 30 new housing units. And they're basically, even though we'll have 6 affordables, 3 and 3, the rest of the units are below market to start with. So that'll be up. We're cognizant of how fast we're gonna go.
Just a point of order, we're not discussing 310 Barnstable in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate that. No, I think that answers the question. Thank you, Mr. Bornstein.
Steve?
Yes, Paula?
Just wanted to clarify our role again, in that we, because I don't know how many meetings we might need if we are the final arbiter of the recommendations to the planning board, but my assumption is the planning board itself will be also going through its process for findings and recommendations.
That's absolutely correct. And just to follow up on that, there may be a consensus made by this board that does not align with the full planning board or the full council. And that's just a fact of how this process works. So, I think at this point, Jim, if you would agree, if we could try and coordinate having fire, conservation, historic building, and the DPW attend the next subcommittee meeting. And is there anybody else, board members, that we'd like to have attend the next meeting?
Can we send out a Google just to get another meeting date? I'm not sure that this Monday morning will work for me the rest of the month. So.
Understood. Yeah, I think we'll follow up on a date and time. I don't think we'll be able to state one today. We'll follow up, and that will, of course, be posted properly.
If I could ask for the recommendation from the Hyannis Historic to be in our next folder, that would be excellent, or a representative from that board. I just think it would be good to get a purview of what they said.
I completely agree. If we could have a member, Jim, potentially attend, if we could make that work. And Jim, thank you for coordinating. I know it's difficult. You'll have a few more to coordinate with this time.
Not a problem. Thank you all so much.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just
Yes.
It took quite a while to get this meeting. If we could just kind of accelerate the meeting schedule, it would be much appreciated.
We share that wish, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, we will do everything we can. Any final comments before we adjourn and seek to set up our second meeting? Okay, I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second.
Thank you. That was Paula with the motion and Jen with the second. All those in favor? Steve?
Aye.
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Paula?
Aye.
Hilda?
Aye.
And myself votes aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.